Hello, everybody.
Jumpy.
Here I am. I'm sorry, I've been a little bit absent these last times. I even missed the Tuesday meeting, I think, because this is the kind of last intensive week of teaching and preparation before exams. So I had my head full of that. The next week will be better, already starting from this weekend. Sorry.
Anyway, I am opponent at the Swedish Defense next week. And I had heard talks about the papers which were involved in the PhD thesis. So I was quite confident that the mathematics of the paper was also follow the heuristics. So you can explain things heuristically, and then you just prove.
Yes.
Fill in the epsilon and deltas in the heuristics, but that I was miscalculating there. So I am now in quite a panic mode on getting through that thesis in great detail to explain what the student actually did. That's a job of an opponent as well in Sweden.
I was very surprised. I was opponent to Tom Britton way back in the day.
Okay.
And I was very surprised that it fell to me to describe what was in the thesis. To me, that was ought to be the role of the candidate.
Yes.
He already did it. But anyway,
No, but traditions are different. I mean, you're lucky that you do not do this in Finland right now, because then you would have to appear in a tight, formally dressed in tight as an opponent and everything. At least in Sweden, you can be wearing normal clothes, which is. In Belgium, you instead have to have an academic toga when you're doing this thing. And in Britain, people seem to just sit around the table, 3 or 4 guys, and.
It's completely informal. There are no. It's private. There are no spectators, so it's just 3 or 4 people in an office in normal gear.
In the Netherlands, I like it. Professors have to show up in gown, or they can borrow one. But in the Netherlands, there is also a specified time. So after 45 minutes, someone comes in, walking in the room, and shouts "Ora est," and then the candidate may finish his sentence.
That's nice.
Yeah. So if you see that person coming in, you often see the candidate already extending the sentence so that nothing new has to be said, no new questions can come. And
yes, it's interesting.
But on the other hand, in the Netherlands and Sweden, it's once you are up for defense, you have already passed unless you really mess up in a way that that you have to put an effort in.
But academia is interesting. In older times in Sweden, there used to be, I think, 3 opponents. And one just had to kind of have all the details about possible errors and misprints and whatever in the thesis. One did a formal opposition about the argument. And the third one was supposed to be more of a friend who made a kind of comical opposition to the thesis. So he had 3 opponents. One after, well, never mind. How goes the paper 6 point, chapter 6, etc.?
Let's go back to that. So, we were talking about 6.4, I think. So when I was working, or I put in some specific challenges. One was about the, let's see where they are. going from now I'm looking. Contact tracing. Oh, sorry, no. More into the direction of when do you move from the branching process regime to a more spatial diffusion percolation regime if you have interventions. I mentioned that it's now written above the conclusion of the part, and there was another part where the different kinds or the hybrid talking about the challenge of hybrid models in the sense that where you have parts you can measure and parts you cannot measure. So you can say something about contacts within or household sizes, perhaps friendships, but you also have the problem that there are the casual contacts, which probably are important for transmission. And so I think they are quite specific.
Have you put those in? Sorry, I'm.
Yeah, so in 6.4, on the first page, the bottom, there is the start. A particular modeling challenge lies in constructing hybrid models.
Okay. Yeah.
And the other part is which is the going interventions from the branching process regime to the diffusion regime mainly, or the percolation regime. That's at the bottom of page 2, going to the start of page 3. So I think both of those are concrete challenges, but perhaps more concrete than you see in other parts of the.
But the question about modeling contact tracing, I wonder how much is really known or unknown about contact tracing from a theoretical point of view. I was wondering about theoretical questions. I mean, if you try, the question is also how realistic one should be when trying to model contact tracing, because contact tracing in practice has many practical limitations, like there's not time to sit and ask many questions. There's not time to sit and try to reach people or investigate who they might be if they are not completely identified, etc. So I don't know.
I was not talking about contact tracing now, but I mentioned it.
No,
that was a mistake.
But
that's I just heard last Wednesday the talk by Mikkel Höhle on contact tracing and how apps are quantified. We can learn something from South Korea, I think, where you get thrown into jail if you don't have your at least you get a big fine if you don't wear your phone with you.
Yes, but you always, of course, the model and reality may differ for factors that are difficult just now to calculate. For instance, how do people that actually get an app, if you are studying, say, contact tracing via app, how do they behave compared to people who don't get the app?
Yeah.
It's an important factor that getting the app is a selective factor in personality or behavior.
Yeah, that's why South Korea is a bit different, where you're obliged, I think.
Yes. When I think of this, if everybody had the app, that's a theoretical situation, but it doesn't really apply apparently to our society.
No.
I don't know. It's I've had problems up to now understanding exactly how much has been done in terms of contact tracing, and this thing about realistically describing the times that it takes, because they interact quite strongly then with incubation times and whatever. And
yeah, we can ask what's her name from Singapore again to join in. She gave a talk on that, right?
yes, no, there have been both papers and talks about contact tracing, but
not much theoretical.
no, I don't know. No, at the moment, I don't have a good view of what has been covered in possible contact tracing strategies, because each one starts out with say, I assume that contact tracing is this, and then maybe something comes out either by simulation or calculation. But what contact tracing is and could be is not really clear to me. And you might also see it completely theoretically, that in the branching process tree, you just see how far could you get before you're blocked by non-identifiable people or whatever, which is interesting as such. I mean, how big is the patch of knowable people around one subject in the branching tree and stuff like that. But I don't know if that is useful for anything practical. So I don't really know how to start up a good question about this would be a challenge to develop.
Yeah.
What? Because contact tracing is important, however, to understand.
I think it is important also from the perspective of so can contact tracing bring your R naught or your say your R naught below 1? For that, I think that studying the theoretical question you just described is a very important one. And it might actually also, if you have a bit more realistic contact tracing, you might actually get those kind of bifurcations that contact tracing, what you see in practice, is efficient if there are few cases. So it can keep R below 1 if there are few cases. So you can prevent an outbreak, but once there are many cases, you cannot use it to bring the epidemic in a declining phase.
And that certainly seems to be the result of the kind of papers that I've read on contact epidemics, that they can help but reduce R naught, but they don't seem to be able to get it below 1 once it's taken off.
Yeah. So it might be a very useful tool in New Zealand and Taiwan.
Yeah.
Well, it's only helping in other countries, but the theoretical understanding I still think is lacking, in the sense of what's really it's a pity that I understood that Kayin Leung, who was a student of Odo Wigman and postdoc of Tom, yes, but she moved to the big bad industry, but I think now she's at the Public Health Institute in the Netherlands. But she would be a good person to look into that. Odo as himself, of course, as well. But I think differential equations might help here.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, I suppose one question is how much does it depend on the contact network, and how sensitive is it to that? Presumably, well, I've always thought it must be very dependent on that, but maybe there's some statements you can make which are more general, which would be really useful, I think.
No, and one other thing that probably then needs to be calculated is also how big is the total work effort connected with a certain strategy. Imagine, for instance, that everybody has an app and everybody who has been in contact for the last 14 days is alerted when one is found positive. how many people will be involved that one way or another must be checked or go test themselves. Because of course you have been in close contact with many more people than just the infected. And most of them are negative, but they will still be part of a work effort. And maybe that quickly becomes so large. So that there are strange factors like how big is the work effort of a certain strategy.
I can't remember where I read it, but I think there was some paper that was talking about, which is quite a nice theoretically related idea, that when you do contact tracing, you don't trace the person, you go back and trace their
infected.
Go back one step, and you ask who were the contacts of the people that were. So the idea being that if you go back, then you're more likely to get a kind of hub, highly connected hub. So in other words, your friends are more likely to have more friends than you have.
That can actually be studied theoretically, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
And indeed, exactly in the sense of rigorously with taking dependencies into account as if the.
No, in many network models that is explicitly recognized that the infector has some kind of biased distribution of infections of a certain infected person when you go backwards.
Yeah.
But then you have the time aspect that going backwards mean that guy was infected already some time ago, and his infector, if you go 2 steps backward, was infected a long time ago and now probably has recovered or died or already been detected by other means. And so there are, well, many funny things. But anyway, yes, I guess that some challenge about contact tracing could still be mentioned, right?
Do we do that at the moment? Or is that not in this section?
My question was more, since I don't know very much about everything that has been written or calculated, what is still left as a challenge? Or if one just says it's not completely understood yet, then that's the challenge.
I mean, there's this. I don't know whether you. Yeah, I think you must have written it, Peter. But the very last paragraph seems to at least talk about contact tracing.
Yeah, I probably have written it, so it's a bit embarrassing that, and I don't.
It doesn't particularly say.
Yeah.
We've tended just to sort of talk about contact tracing without really specifying what the actual mechanism is, and I suppose somewhere we need to discuss possible mechanisms and effects and what we already know. So you know, whether you're just tracing forward or whether you're going backwards at one step and then forwards and so on. And my impression is even what's done practically varies quite a lot. So I guess maybe we can just pick the ones that the forms that we think might be amenable to saying something about, you know, analytically and without worrying too much about exactly what is done. But I don't know.
I'm now thinking about the backward and forward with apps. Using apps, it's pretty hard to even search for the backward and the forward people, right?
Well, if you don't have the database in one place, like I think that Singapore has the database in one place, it's a kind of the government state, so they could probably track individuals backwards and see that guy exactly is identifiable, while we, for instance, in Italy have chosen a kind of anonymous system like that. that Apple and Google recommended, where the information is really only in your phone. You never identify people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
maybe I
if the
just
state,
add over here.
if the
Oh,
state
sorry.
collects the identities of everybody, then of course you can go back and see that person was contacted by, etc.
So you, what did you say,
Desmond.
Desmond?
Oh yeah. No, I was just trying to add on to share some of what we are doing here. So yeah, yes, we do have an app. So what happens is if you visit like a workplace or a restaurant or a shop here in Singapore, you are required to scan the QR code. All right. So that was version 1. So you will be scanning the QR code and your particulars will be taken down. You know, you have your ID taken down that you have visited this place at this time. But right now, in fact, they're moving on to using Bluetooth. So there's an app whereby they will kind of share your, I mean, there's some kind of anonymity in it, but they will record in your phone the contacts you had for a certain number of days. And if there is a match with someone who is suspected of COVID-19, then you'll be alerted from the app. But the guarantee from the government is that all this info is not uploaded to the server unless you have been alerted of such possible contacts. So that's how it's been done.
Yes, the last thing you said is the same structure as in Italy. That your phone just knows a lot of identities of other phones in a sense.
Yeah.
But these are reserved. But once you become positive, tell the authority the identity of your phone, and that is then broadcast to all phones, and those that find your identity among their identity lists alerts the owner. But the thing does not go back who has been alerted, for instance. So it shouldn't go back. And so it becomes a problem of the owner of the phone who gets an alert to do something about it. Either he decides to go test himself or not, or at the moment it's his choice because he's not identified by this operation. But the critique has been that very often when you go test yourself and you're positive, the personnel should then ask you to, you should tell them the identity of your phone so that it can be broadcast over this net. But very often it has been found they don't have time to do this, so they forget or whatever. So there are practical problems in making this work, apart from the fact that in Italy, I think we have reached only 4 or 5 million, 5-6% of the population or whatever it is uses this app at the moment. It's not very picked up by people because it's a choice in Italy to do it. So yes, if one wants to represent this theoretically, you have different levels. I mean, one can assume everybody has it, everybody can be identified. Only parts can be identified, people choose to have it, and you get quite different situations.
I'm not really sure what the position of the app is in this country, how much it's used. We don't seem to be hearing very much about it lately, although the QR codes are still dotted around. But a lot of the I understood a lot of the tracing was done, by interviewing people, phoning them up and people who tested positive and asking. So that's quite a different sort of thing, and that in principle allows one to go backwards, but I'm not clear that they do.
Well, the problem with going backwards is that if I come in and I'm positive and they ask me, who have you met these last weeks that could have infected you? They must in some sense find that person or data about him. And usually data is not integrated nationwide about all known positives.
Sure.
So they must contact each one of the persons I named to see, are you positive or have you tested yourself? And said, and you lose time in all this.
Sure. Although sometimes, I mean, the odd people that I know who have tested positive have usually had a fairly good idea where they were infected. I mean, they may not be right, of course, but I mean, people do sometimes know because, you know, they actually know of having been in touch with somebody who subsequently developed symptoms or whatever. Obviously, I mean, none of this picks up the asymptomatic people, but there is some information there that could be used.
And also events that are widely known as dangerous, like I was at a party with 20 people or a funeral with 30 people and stuff like that. And so they kind of...
One aspect of this problem is something that maybe belongs in the data paper, because in the data discussion the other day, we were discussing the possibility that one way around confidentiality of databases is assume first. So first of all, one might say that the it's a good thing to have a database of all cases that's connected up, and obviously there might be privacy safeguards you need to put in for that. But if it comes to contact tracing, it might be an example where what you want is for to be able to have a protocol, a computer program, whatever, that can access the confidential database, but in controlled circumstances, so that you keep control that the output is not used to infringe privacy. So in other words, rather than being able to actually straight away look at the data, so for instance, the contact tracing person you do it through some sort of interface where you get out the information you need to do something about the spread of the epidemic with the minimum personal information being divulged or kept anywhere else. So I think, so I'm not quite sure how this would work for contact tracing, but I just think it's more a challenge for the data paper than for us. Perhaps we could, but it could be something where you cross-refer.
And then, of course, it would be kind of fun to also have data on the success of these things. I mean, do you gain a lot about with having such an app and system just compared to the classical call in your family and let's test them? And that's it, something like that.
Another distinction with this contact tracing is whether you're doing it for everyone, or even if it's impractical to do for everyone, it could be worth putting a lot of effort into contact tracing studies to understand. So, you know, if you had a study in a country of 1,000 people who've had the disease, and you really make a very great effort to find out how they were what the local pattern of spread looked like, then you may learn things about the disease, which are the more, you know, what kind of situations are causing the most contacts, which can be useful. So I think we should, in a modeling paper, it seems to me it's going to be appropriate to explain what advantages you can have from understanding contact tracing, and then perhaps in a data paper you might explain how, you know, the sort of database problems and some possible ways around them from that point of view, with obviously
yes, if you remember the SARS papers and period, then apparently they were able to trace most contact trees. I mean, there were nice pictures in various papers about the spread, and usually coming down to a few super spreaders here and there. I mean, apparently there it worked. And in fact, there were not that many people involved in the SARS spread. So there is something about the amount of work possible and
but the thing about SARS, of course, was because it didn't have the problem of the asymptomatic cases. It was a
Yes,
much
it's easier to find the cases and then by
easier
many
to
questions
detect.
trace them back to certain events or houses or things like that. Okay, so this is about the section 4 of the paper, right?
Yeah.
What should we say about interventions that should be studied in one way or another? And both theoretically and data observationally. Because in fact, as Valerie said, I mean, I haven't heard much about the numerical success of the app in various countries and how many have been found thanks to this and things like
that's a difficult question to answer without knowing. You know, I'm not aware of anyone really keeping a close eye on exactly when and how interventions have been introduced across different countries. So it's quite difficult to know the efficacy. And, you know, for example, just in the UK, we've had so many different regional and national lockdowns and different intervention measures, how you go about teasing out those and what the efficacy of each one of those is relative to the others when they often only last a couple of weeks. So I'm not sure how feasible that would be, but yeah, I think that's definitely a challenge.
Again, this is a sort of a cross-cutting sort of issue, isn't it? Because the if there's maybe in the same paper as economics or possibly policy, you know, one needs a discussion of the sort of social behavioural aspects of interventions. And I think Miriam actually in the interventions paper is well aware of the it was Hannah Clapham who wrote something, wasn't it, about how you really need to think through what kind of interventions make actual social sense, so that you don't, as a modelers, just study some kind of abstract kind of intervention, which you as a modeler, without understanding very much about data on behavior, think it would be very handy if we did such and such a thing, and actually that anyone who knows about behavior will know that that isn't actually an intervention that is going to make any practical sense. So so there are all these aspects, aren't there? But I was thinking what we should be trying to do is, I suppose, here is maybe therefore to try and think from a modeling point of view whether we can classify the different sort of interventions in what they're, if you, from the modeling point of view, there might be several different things you can do which all really enter into a model in very much the same way. Then there might be other things, interventions you could make which affect the model in a very different way. So for instance, suppose you had some kind of group or household model. Very simple example is where you have interventions which affect whole households or which affect, let's say, a certain proportion of the people in each household. I mean, obviously for modeling. So
the classical subdivision up to now has been the classical formula CPD, C times P times D. Number of contacts per day, probability of infection per contact, and duration of an infectious period. And then usually trying to say what was modified by the intervention, if it was the duration of the number of contacts or the contact probability. But you're right, if you go into households and stuff like that, then you should have more details about what the intervention is about. Isolating one member of the household or making everybody wear masks at home or whatever they're doing.
I mean, I think a very relevant consideration here is heterogeneity, in that if in fact you have a disease which is being spread to a very large extent by a relatively small proportion of the infected people, whether because you have super spreading events or whether you have super spreading individuals, then then clearly interventions ideally should be trying to target these that part of the spectrum. I mean, an intervention which makes a whole lot of people who weren't actually having much contact anyway have even less contact doesn't make much difference.
No, but of course, it's something that is discussed quite a lot in media. Right now in Italy, we are, as everybody is approaching the Christmas holidays, and the government has dictated that you are in theory not allowed to go visit your parents who live in the neighboring borough or county or something like that. You should stay at home and not meet your parents. And of course, a lot of people have protested in the media saying that I have tested negative, why can I not go and see my father or something like that? And then virologists will say, yes, but the tests are not perfect. The fact that you tested negative a couple of days ago is not a guarantee, etc., etc. So what you say about social acceptability or meaning of interventions is quite important, at least in this second phase, because it seems that the public is reacting much more strongly to interventions now than in the first phase. When the disease was new, everybody agreed that we should stay at home and stop this thing. Now people are getting used to it in some strange way, and then they say, no, this restriction is too much, I would like only half of it, and this and that, and it's more and more difficult to regulate this thing, at least in Italy. I don't know about other countries.
I think it's, well, and I mean, that's also, well, I suppose it's related to public trust in government, isn't it? I mean, if you've had an interventions policy and it doesn't seem to, from the public perception, probably in most European countries, the interventions don't seem to be very successful. Now, of course, they may actually be significantly successful in that without them, we might have had total disasters with hospitals unable to cope and a lot of people dying of the disease who would not have died of the disease if the hospitals had not been overwhelmed and so on. So you never quite know what you're comparing it with. But if the public perception is that the government don't really know what they're doing, then
you start criticizing.
It's simple human nature. They're much less likely to do what the government asks them to do.
But also, I think people get habituated to whatever risk they're exposed to, so and then stop worrying about it as much.
Yeah.
Look at a natural reaction.
Yeah, and it's.
Yeah, I think countries profit from neighboring countries who mess up.
Yeah.
Well, our neighbours should be doing well then.
Yeah, no, Ireland is actually doing well. You should give them that. That's the closest thing I would count to a neighbour of the UK. Is it the only UK land border with Ireland?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, except for some colonies that are still left, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
I
Okay.
think that has some overseas territories that border on others. All these Guyanas, the French, and is there a British one or a Dutch one? I don't remember. It's just some overseas territories still bordering with somebody. But anyway, essentially Ireland, yes, I guess.
So Ireland is doing well. And in Sweden, our neighbors are doing well as well. So. Sweden is still not doing too bad, though. That's, but yeah. But what is the plan further? I have to leave in about 5 minutes.
Not only that, but we have to finish this paper as well.
I don't think that will be in 5 minutes.
Maybe not 5.
Well, I think that's yeah. Well, I think we need to take each group for each section needs to move more towards praising our specific challenges, isn't it?
So to have a piece of text at least that put together makes a paper, then we can try to judge if it's okay. But we should have a kind of first version of the text of the section.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we really have sort of notes for
the text, yes.
section, and it needs to be next stage you might call draft text, where you write it as it might be in a finished paper, and if you don't have references, you at least say what you're going to need references to.
Yeah.
That's at quite a lot of places already in the notes.
I mean, clearly identifying the challenges is the first challenge,
Yeah.
and then some notes at least, or better still, prose about what sort of points need to be made or can be made underneath that challenge, and any relevant references.
Yeah, and I think it would be, yeah. So I think the challenge would be to, the challenge is to have a list of to turn each section for each section to provide a list of challenges, provisional challenges as they might appear in a paper. And if you think there are different ways of doing this and you're hesitating between them, but by all means, put down both. So yeah.
But do you think that these main points are still missing in some sections? Because, as you say, there are points in each section. So
maybe they just need to be pulled out of the text and
made more precise. This is the challenge.
And I suppose the other thing is we need, well, it'd be very good if people can look at this overall and say, well, actually, we've considered it from 5 different aspects, but here are some things we've missed out.
Yeah.
And also, of course, there are some things which might wholly go better in one of the other papers. And also, but perhaps more commonly, there are several things we've talked about today where they're absolutely legitimate to discuss from the modeler's point of view, but recognize also there is a behavioral or data or other point of view. So we should perhaps have a dialogue for those topics with the people writing the other papers. But I mean, you can obviously, the first thing is you can look in the other folders in the Dropbox and see if you can see what the people in the database, see if in the draft to do with data that they're referring to topics we're referring to, and if so, some kind of interaction I think is needed.
But I think just having for all these sections of chapter 6, a list of bullet point challenges, so we could look down a complete list of identified challenges that we think come under modeling. It would help a lot to clarify where there are gaps, and also to overlaps with other chapters. But just having one long list of headings would, for me at least, be quite useful, because at the moment, each section, one has to sort of wade through the text and I try to identify them. So I think that would be a good target.
We take that as a task to, in a sense, summarize our sections into what are the main points.
The main challenges.
Yes.
That we've identified. And there may be, I mean, if we do that, extracting them from what we've already got by sort of moving bits of text around and so on, there may be a sort of a bit of a rag bag of odd points at the end that we can't quite work into challenges. I don't know, but I think it'll become clearer if we
Well,
attempt.
but that's section 7, other challenges.
Okay. Things we can't, well, I mean, I think there are things which are challenges, but we may not be able to say much about.
Hmm.
And there are others where we can say, you know, we can see a
We
clearer
can be
way
more
through.
precise, yes.
Yeah.
Miscellaneous section.
Sorry?
Miscellaneous section.
Yes, miscellaneous section at the end. Okay, shall we try to do this then
Would be good.
to summarize what we have written up to now, or if something is missing, put that down, but still in the summary form so that we get the whole structure of what we want to say. It's always easy to flesh it out afterwards. I mean, summarizing is usually seen as more difficult than extending.
I think yes. I mean, once we've got that list of challenges sort of clearly expressed, then we can write round that. But actually, sort of nailing down exactly what the challenges are is much more of a challenge.
Yes.
So I suppose we would encourage the people involved in each of the 5 sections to have some discussion by email or by using a coffee or tea session for a short discussion to make some progress before, and then we have a final meeting before Christmas, same time next week.
Yes.
Yeah. Next week, same time, I cannot be there, but because I am grilling.
You are the
Because you're
opponent.
doing your,
Also,
It's the coffee time problem.
And yeah, Peter, we had if we did the same as we did, which day were we on this week?
Friday at 10 o'clock UK was this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
but
had
if Jasmina and Lisa are there, then it's okay, I think.
The 6.1 we use Tuesday.
Yeah, then I can be there.
Yes, Tuesday is okay.
So for 6.1 we will use
Tuesday slot again.
Yes, 6.1.
So we invite those for 6.2 through to 6.5 to choose times for themselves. I mean, do people want to do that now?
Well, we not everybody is here, of course, but
Ben and me probably just need to contact Jasmine.
I mean, actually, it may be easiest to do that by email. It may also be easiest to do that once the bulletin is out, which I think it will be today, today, probably for next week,
we
because
usually get it early afternoon, don't we?
Do people here have any particular days or times they either are the only times they could do, or the ones they really feel they must avoid? Because once we get the bulletin, we could, I mean, Valerie and I could be very high-handed and just propose a timetable and allow people to object to it.
I think it's probably better just to, I mean, because we're only talking about small groups of people. Just to
do we have an identified person? So the alternative really is, do we have an identified lead person for each of 6.2 to 6.5?
Well, both Lisa and Jasmina in their messages on Slack said, let them know what their tasks are. So we can allocate them something.
I can do 6.3 because that's what I've been working on mostly.
Should we suggest people arrange this through Slack then?
Yeah,
that's probably the
best way to do it. Okay. So let's continue the conversation through Slack as to how people are making progress on the various sections between now and next Friday.
Okay, and 6.1 has a Tuesday meeting at 3 o'clock p.m.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, good.
That's fine.
See you.
Have a nice weekend then, all of you.
And you.
You too.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.